The Silence of the Lambs came out in 1991. It won all 5 major Academy Awards: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Screenplay. The only horror film in history to achieve that. Anthony Hopkins appears on screen for 16 minutes across the entire film. 16 minutes! And he became one of the most discussed, most imitated, most studied screen villains ever created. Most analyses of Hannibal Lecter focus on what he does, the violence, the intelligence, the aesthetic refinement. And if that's where you've stopped, you've missed the reason he still works 30 years later. Because Hannibal Lecter isn't terrifying because he's evil. He's terrifying because every time he looks at someone, he's right. About them, about the world, about the things people spend their whole lives pretending aren't true. And once you see what he's actually saying, you can't unhear it. Welcome back to Spy Dogs. I'm Matt. Today, we're opening the case file on the villain who sees too clearly. Before we get to the thesis, I want you to think about something. Every major villain in cinema history gives you a clear reason to reject them. They want power, they're cruel, they're insane, they believe something monstrous. The rejection is easy. You can look at them and say, I am not that. I would never do that. I don't think like that. Now think about Hannibal Lecter. Think about his actual beliefs, the things he says out loud across 16 minutes of screen time. Not the violence, the observations. And ask yourself honestly, how many of them are wrong? Our thesis is that almost none of them are. Hannibal Lecter is the greatest film villain ever created because the rejection isn't easy. You can't look at him and say, I am not that, because too much of what he says is true. And that's the most frightening thing any story has ever done to an audience. The first revelation is what Hannibal actually does in every conversation, and the standard reading gets it wrong. Most analyses describe him as manipulative, a chess player moving pieces, calculating what people want to hear and giving it to them. In our view, that's not what's happening. Hannibal isn't telling Clarice what she wants to hear. He's telling her what nobody else has been willing to say out loud. He reads her accent and her cheap bag and her good shoes and her ambition, and he gives her the most accurate summary of herself she's ever received, from someone who's known her for 4 minutes. That's not manipulation, that's perception. He sees people so clearly that the truth lands like a weapon. And the reason it's unsettling isn't that he's wrong, it's that he's completely right. And nobody in her life who loves her has ever seen her that clearly. I think that's the moment, the first cell scene, where the film tells you exactly what Hannibal is. Not a monster who lies, a monster who tells the truth. And the truth, in his hands, is the most dangerous thing in the room. The second revelation is what Hannibal actually believes, and this is where the film becomes genuinely uncomfortable. The standard reading is that Hannibal is insane, that his values are pathological, that the things he says reflect a broken mind and nothing more. In our view, that's the reading the film deliberately makes available to people who don't want to sit with the alternative. Hannibal's core belief, stated most clearly in the rudeness speech, is that most people are rude, dishonest, and cowardly, and that society politely pretends otherwise. He finds this unacceptable. He values beauty, precision, and honesty, and he has contempt for people who waste their intelligence on mediocrity. These are not the beliefs of a madman. They are the beliefs of an aesthete who has removed the social contract that stops most people from acting on contempt. And here's the part that stays with me. Most of us share some version of that contempt. We just don't act on it. The difference between Hannibal Lecter and the audience watching him isn't in the observation. It's in what he's willing to do with it. That's not a comfortable distance. That's the closest the film ever comes to its real thesis. But here's where it gets genuinely difficult. Because Revelation 3 isn't about what Hannibal sees in other people. It's about what he sees in Clarice. And in our view, It's the most human relationship in the film, which is the most disturbing thing Jonathan Demme ever put on screen. The third revelation is the relationship between Hannibal and Clarice, and the most common reading is that it's a manipulation. Hannibal uses Clarice to entertain himself. He helps her because she's useful. It's a game and she's a piece. In our view, that's the comfortable reading, and the film doesn't support it. Hannibal helps Clarice catch Buffalo Bill. He gives her the key insight that solves the case. Not because he had to, not because it served his escape, but because he respected her enough to give her a real answer. He keeps his promise not to pursue her after escaping, not because he can't find her, but because he said he wouldn't. And the final phone call. "I do wish we could chat longer, but I'm having an old friend for dinner," is one of the most chilling lines in cinema, precisely because it sounds warm. He is genuinely fond of her, in his way. In our reading, the most frightening thing about Hannibal Lecter isn't the violence or the intelligence or the philosophy. It's that his relationship with Clarice is the most honest relationship either of them has. He sees her completely. He tells her the truth. He keeps his word. And he does all of this while being a monster. The film is asking a question it never fully answers. What does it mean when the most honest person in someone's life is the most dangerous? Here's what The Silence of the Lambs is really about. Not a serial killer being caught. Not a woman proving herself in a man's world, though it's that too. It's about what happens when someone sees you completely clearly, without the filters of politeness or social expectation, and tells you exactly what they see. Clarice spends the entire film being underestimated, talked over, and handled by men who see her as a resource. The one person who sees her as an equal, who takes her seriously, who gives her real answers, who tells her the truth about herself, is in a cell. And then he escapes. And his last act is to keep a promise he made to someone he respects. Hannibal Lecter endures because he poses a question that has no clean answer. The scariest villains in fiction are the ones who aren't entirely wrong. And Hannibal is never entirely wrong. He's just willing to follow his conclusions somewhere the rest of us won't go. The distance between his worldview and ours is smaller than the film wants us to believe. And 30 years later, I think that's still the most frightening thing about him. Is Hannibal's relationship with Clarice genuine, or is it the longest manipulation in cinema history? And here's the harder question. Does it matter? If someone sees you clearly, tells you the truth, and keeps their word, does it change anything that they're also a monster? Drop your take in the comments. I've been sitting with that question since the first time I watched this film. Subscribe and hit the bell. Villain Studies is our series on the characters who changed what screen villains are allowed to be. And if you haven't seen our breakdown of why Gus Fring is the greatest TV villain ever written, that video is in the end screen right now.